Good morning. Welcome to the British Library. Congratulations for getting here so bright and early for today's fantastic set of sessions. The World Builders, the Influence of Fantasy in Games and Film Design. My name is John Fawcett. I have the privilege of looking after the public events programme here at the British Library, and it's been an absolute thrill to create a programme around the fantasy exhibition, which is just on its final weekend over in the main building. Can I ask who's managed to catch the exhibition so far? Oh, that is great to hear. Great to hear. It is unfortunately sold out now, but those of you who've seen it will know we're ever so proud of it. It's a whistle-stop tour of books, manuscripts, artworks, costumes, and of course the influence of games and films is prominent in there, with of course works such as The Incredible Fall in London from Fell Better Games. It's like we couldn't really think of another genre or another area of human creativity which is so multi-platform across books, video, of every other type of platform that you can imagine. It is really rich. So we're absolutely thrilled to be hosting today's events. We would like to thank very much Paton and Htay for curating the event with us, and for other partners, namely today's first session has been created in partnership with BAFTA, who've been incredible supporters, and BAFTA are also hosting a drop-in workshop in the main entrance hall from 1 till 4:30 this afternoon, focusing on games design, where you can see some examples and create some of your own ideas and look at how they might be put into practice if you'd like to go over to that. So this first session is hosted by Luke Hebblethwaite, who is the head of games at BAFTA. Over to the panel. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
That's all right. Okay. Let's hope it's the right clicker. Or we'll be clicking someone else's presentation. Hello, welcome to the British Library and this amazing panel we have on world building in games as part with BAFTA and mainly our Young Game Designer competition. And to those of you in the room, welcome, and those of you watching online, I hope you can see it all. And it's great to have you here as well in libraries around the country. So this panel looks at world building in games. To give you a bit of an intro to that, as you mentioned, I'm Luke Hebblethwaite, the head of games at BAFTA. And BAFTA is an arts charity that is here to celebrate the creative and cultural importance of film, games and television. And BAFTA's been working in the games industry for 20 plus years. You hopefully are aware of BAFTA. You may have seen our film awards hosted by the wonderful David Tennant on Sunday, but we also have a Games Awards and TV. And our Games Awards is coming up on the 11th of April, so please get that one in your diaries. And our Young Game Designer competition is part of the core work in which we do in our wider work to celebrate and champion the games as a medium, to support talent in the sector from very early on, from young people who are interested in getting into games all the way through to people who are well into their careers and how we help them get on. I think just talking about games and what world building is, games is an incredibly important cultural medium now. We've evolved so much and we continue to do so over the years. We know that basically everyone plays games, whether you're playing on your console, whether you're playing on your PC, whether you're playing on your phone, whatever it is you're doing, you're engaging with games, and you don't have to be this kind of stereotypical gamer in order to do that. The thing that sort of separates games from the other more linear forms is that we place ourselves in these worlds. Games are interactive, and you yourself get a chance to explore and interact with that medium in ways that are quite different sometimes to how you may experience worlds in the literary form or in films and TV. So I want to, I think the best thing to do is just to introduce the panel. So if we can start on my right with Bridie.
Hi everyone, I'm Bridie Roman from Devolver Digital. I'm a senior producer. I basically just help wonderful game teams get their games out to you, the loving consumer.
Hi, I'm James Chu. I'm a senior writer at Fell Better Games. We make Fall London and other Victorian Gothic works so far.
Hi, I'm Sophia Shepherd. I guess when I was younger, I was really into fantasy worlds and games and stuff. So yeah, I applied to YGD, and my concept won with a bunch of friends. It's called Tea and Tartlets. And since then, I've been inspired to get into games, and I'm now working as a technical art intern for Rare.
Hi, I'm Alfred Wilkinson. I won YGD in 2022 for the 10 to 14 game making category. and then I released my game Alien on Steam and consoles, and then now I own Space by Games, which is my first company.
Incredible stuff. Click onwards. So, yeah, I think just to start with James and Bridie, I just think in working in the industry, I think it's important for us to give a bit of context to what we mean by world building in games. So I wanted to ask you both, really, first off, I think, James, firstly, congratulations on being exhibited at the British Library with Fallen London. It's a fantastic exhibition. You must feel very proud about that.
Extremely. It's lovely seeing it, and in such a scale as well.
Yeah. It's fantastic to be hosting in what is actually my favourite building in London as well, so it's lovely to be here likewise. So I guess the first question is, what do we mean by world building in games? What is world building?
I guess for us, world building it's the setting, it's everything kind of around the story, it's the world in which the player is moving through, it's the backdrop to what they're doing, but it's also the reason for what they're doing. Often it's kind of a means of generating story. For us, our setting is kind of an alternate London, so we can kind of draw on real history, real 19th century history, but it's at a very significant remove. And those differences both kind of help us explain what the setting is, what it is that your role is. We tell you you're in 19th century London, but it's underground, and there are giant bats who've stolen it. That gives you some context for what you're doing and why you're doing it. But also the kind of reasons behind that setting, the world building, the lore, for want of a better term, often kind of generate stories for us. Why is this different? What it's like to be different? What does that look like? How does that motivate, and how does that provide mysteries that the player is then encouraged to explore?
Fantastic. And Bridie, you work as a producer for Devolver Digital, so they publish games and you sort of work on games other people.
Yeah, so I help other people bring their world building, to the public by encouraging them, giving them everything they need to make a successful game, but also occasionally being the least favourite person in the room to say, this is wonderful world building, but you don't have time to make it.
Yeah.
So often the rational voice to say, so with the Talus principle, that map's too big, make it smaller, please.
So steering the creative impulse.
So, and world building is like the marriage between the gameplay function of there are puzzles, why are we doing the puzzles? And then bringing in the story reasons that justify the gameplay actions.
And so how do you think players and people would experience world building within games? What are the sort of key places they might interact with that?
Well, there's lore books. Lots of RPGs love to put in a book that you can pick up and carry around and never read. Or read. I read them. But it's also, there's environmental storytelling that really helps make a world feel real. But it doesn't take a lot of words or, more than a piece of graffiti or a knocked over chair or something like that. That doesn't have to be addressed, really, but it's something that helps a scene feel complete.
And so, James, maybe the sort of distinction between more direct storytelling of the world, so you might describe how a character or a situation, or you might create other elements within the world that kind of just tell you a bit more about the space in other ways. So maybe the kind of two ways of looking at it?
Yeah, there's, obviously, as you say, there's kind of having to be told facts by another character. This is how the world works. This is what you need to understand for this story to make sense, that kind of exposition. But often there's kind of more subtle ways of going about kind of just fleshing out the world. We have a lot of items, things you can pick up, things you can carry in the various game economies across our titles. And we often give those items like fun little descriptions, like a piece of amber you can pick up, but we'll then kind of write in it, this isn't ordinary amber, this is creepy amber, things of that nature. Just to kind of gradually kind of build the world through those little details, and then kind of establishing connections. So you might kind of then see a reference or a use for that amber somewhere, and that's telling you something about what its function is, what the societies that use it, that rely on or have created this amber are like. But we don't state that out loud, we let the player gradually build up a picture of this one kind of facet of lore through repetition.
Yeah, and so that nature of the interactivity of the medium gives you different kinds of opportunities to tell that story, so not necessarily stating, if you think about Star Wars, you can tell the story of Han Solo being in the Cantina bar, but like what the cantina bar looks like and how it interacts is quite different in games because you can participate within that. You can wander around it and talk to someone else around the corner.
Yeah, I mean, with the cantina, I guess you can... the problem is the player won't start a fight and will just hang around not doing anything that you want them to do, and then the story drags to a
I would
halt.
start a fight. That's how I've been playing Baldur's Gate.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm trying to be nice. But, you do you, I guess. And yeah, so I think in that exploration, I guess, that the player takes within the world, you have all these different kinds of content that you want to create, and how do you have a system that manages that? I think we might call it a lore book or a style guide to how you want to work on and build on that.
We have a couple of things. We have player-facing documents. Often we've done a few Kickstarters and released like lovely lore books for players that have kind of lovely art and kind of condense as much as possible to make it comprehensible but not too deep, because our games are all about secrets and mysteries and no one actually really wants them written down and spelled out like that. They might think they want that, but they don't. It will spoil the game for them. But we have internal documentation, which is intended to keep track of it. And when I first joined the company, they were massive groaning Google Sheets, kind of spreadsheets of partitioning out kind of by level of depth of each secret. Like saying kind of everyone knows that there are rubbery men and they look like octopuses. What they don't know is the secret mysteries and plots of the rubbery men. And everything was laid out like that. And we realized that doesn't really give us the information we need. A, it's impossible to scroll through. And B, it's just not possible. What we actually needed to know was, what do players know? What do we know? And then how much have we revealed? How much have players guessed? What have we clarified? And what have we actually said definitively? And what is still to be revealed? All those kind of matrices of information were vital for us to actually keep track of what it is we've actually said about our setting.
So managing the mystery as much as anything
Exactly,
else.
that is exactly the term
I think
for it.
that's a really important part of world building, is that you do internal world building amongst the developers, but the external world building that you share doesn't necessarily, it's not the same, but you have to have that internal logic. Otherwise, what the player sees doesn't make sense.
And I guess that's true in all games. So the games you've worked on, the games you create, but also in Minecraft, in Fortnite, in any of the worlds that exist in games. Those worlds aren't real places, so everything has to be created in a sense to give that sense of place.
Yeah, and I'm sure all those, the teams making those games have knowledge and secrets of, oh yeah, well that's like that because of this, that just will never be shared.
That will know where the Ender Dragon came from,
Yeah.
all of that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Fantastic. So I want to talk to our wonderful young game designer alumni, but before I do so, Alfie, we're going to have a quick look at your award-winning game. Fantastic. So, firstly, congratulations on winning Young Game Designer. Can you want to tell us a little bit about Eglian and what you were trying to create and what the world is?
So Eglian is like this action platformer shooter. It's very fast-paced and it will keep you on your toes. There's loads of boss fights as well that are really interesting and quite fun to blast through, of course. And then it's got this really interesting story about kind of how humans have destroyed the Earth, and these aliens have kind of transformed from humans, and then now they're kind of out for Astri, who is the main protagonist of the game, because she's kind of trying to revert things back to how they were before humans kind of destroyed the planet.
Fantastic. And so you made this whole game yourself?
Yes.
From start to finish, you made the music, you made the art.
Yeah.
It's an incredible achievement. Fantastic. Well
Thank
done.
you.
How old were you when you did that?
14.
14.
And I started when I was 13.
Well, I feel like I wasted my teenage years and my 20s and 30s, but yeah, okay, fair enough. Well, okay, so in that, coming into that endeavour, what what inspired you really to create that world, and how did you, I guess the balance between how much of it did you have in mind to start with versus how much kind of emerged as you made the game?
I'm a very kind of decide as you go game designer. So I kind of started off, actually, I remember the initial prototype and it was a guy with a jetpack. And I thought, how many games are there with a guy with a jetpack? So I kind of looked back and I looked at that concept and then I decided, what if we use eggs in some form? And I thought...
Sure, logical next choice.
What if we use eggs? and basically I was just thinking of like puns, maybe at school or something, and Egglian came into mind. So I got back home and I put in the Egglian character. And it all kind of spiraled from there. So I feel like I then picked up inspirations on the way, like a huge inspiration was Downwell, with its kind of shoot-to-move mechanics. And yeah, I kind of just formed it over a lot of stuff that I liked, especially like Game Boy era games as well. You can kind of see like the limited colour palette as well.
Yeah.
So I think it was really like a major case of just kind of blending and mixing as I went.
And with the story side of it, that may not necessarily, seeing that, the footage we just watched, it's not necessarily a story-driven game where you're trying to tell a direct story. So when you wanted to add that sort of extra layer of context in, how did that come about?
I kind of thought about a message that I wanted to convey that I kind of thought was important, but I wanted to do it in a bit of a different way that wasn't very as direct, and it kind of allowed players to infer for themselves what they wanted to take out of the story. Some people could see it as like a fun retro game, kind of retro-inspired game, or some people could look at the message and maybe think about this future that I've kind of created in storytelling and, see maybe what they can do to help make that not happen.
Yeah. And if you were thinking about expanding that world now, if you went back, I know you're busy working on your next game for this year's YGD.
That is correct, yes.
How far through are you? The deadline has just been extended, so I think that probably helps you.
I've been crunching quite a lot, I know.
You don't like that
such
word.
a shame. That word is evil.
I hope you are taking time to
I'm taking
recuperate while
healthy
you
time
work.
and healthy breaks.
Yeah.
I am.
Good, okay, good healthy lifestyle while developing games, please.
Yeah.
But if you look back on Egglian now, and obviously with a bit more experience under your belt, what would you do differently? Is there anything you'd like to add or sort of...
Something I've realised about storytelling is that it's a lot more interesting if you show the player the story instead of telling them that. And I feel like I relied a lot on text. And text is a really easy way and low-budget way to convey information to players. But I feel like now that I look back, and obviously because of my skills have developed since then, I feel like I'd like to make the story maybe a bit more involved and more graphic and maybe just kind of more delightful for the player.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, it's certainly a fantastic achievement, so well done. And I shall very much look forward to finding out what you're up to next.
Thank you.
When it's ready. So yeah, Sophia, I want to have a chat with you. So again, you won the YGD concept category, so the category that isn't about making a game but about showing the game design and documentation, because there's so many games roles in the industry that aren't necessarily about being the coding person and that kind of thing. We have an award to celebrate people with the creative vision, of which you obviously have quite a creative vision for tea and tartlets. And then you've made your sort of the creative jump to making your own game, your first game, Htay and the Potion Maker, which is very fantasy inspired. So should we have a quick look at that? Here we go. Oh, what a gorgeous looking game that is.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Thank you so
So
much.
is that your the first game you've created?
I think that was the second game I created. Like, I think the first game I made was like a really basic, like a dot moving about on the screen. You know, like the dot that eats other dots to get bigger.
Okay, yeah, yeah.
Inspired by that.
Okay. Well, that's quite a jump, I have to say.
Yeah,
So
it was.
congratulations about
Thank
that.
you.
Do you want to just tell us a little bit about Htay the Potion Maker?
Yeah, of course. So yeah, Htay the Potion Maker is this fantasy pixel game, as you can see. It's a puzzle game, and it's about connecting ingredients together in like there's rules defining how you can connect ingredients together. And you do it in such a way that when they're all connected, you brew a potion. And it tells the story of Htay, who's a 12-year-old witch, sort of alone in her desire and passion to make potions. And you get a little bit of a story after you complete a certain amount of potions that sort of progress, her story. And there's some nice moments I tried to add in there where, like, after you've completed a certain level of potions, she's making these potions in her house, and you can interact with different objects that give you a slight insight as to her thoughts and why she's there.
Okay, fantastic. And yeah, as I say, it's a gorgeous looking game, but it's really, I think, the really nice balance between the sort of puzzle elements and then the storytelling elements. So how was that balance of interweaving kind of more direct gameplay with then sort of quite direct storytelling?
Yeah. It's interesting. I feel like I used to write stories when I was younger, but they were all very like self-inserty, not very good, not very well thought out. And I thought games is a nice way of having that more soft storytelling, as we said, where you can imply things instead of directly feeding them story beats. And it was nice. Like I had the thought of as you get better at potion making, that leads to a nice progression as to the insights as to why she's doing it and give the player more of a reason as to what is happening. I'm not really... I was influenced by Celeste.
Okay.
I feel like it's nice how Celeste does it, where you go through a certain level of levels and then at the end you're rewarded with a small cutscene. And I really liked the way that worked, so I thought that would be a nice reward as a player, not just for completing the potions, but also getting a little nugget of story after that.
Yeah, it's interesting with Celeste, you can definitely see some of that in the art style, which again, similarly gorgeous, so congratulations on that. And so what kind of other inspirations from the sort of more literary world were part of this journey to create this game?
I think, so I'm a very visual person, I'm a technical artist now, and I've been drawing a lot. I definitely get a lot of inspiration from other artists, so I think the internet has been wonderful in allowing you to see other artists' inspiration. There was definitely a big blow-up of witchy inspiration, and like this cozy vibe that people were really desiring, and also like all the pastel, pinky, purpley colors as well that I was like really into back then. So that's sort of where the visuals came up, and also inspired by My Love, which is like anime, and like there's like the Sailor Moon retro anime style sort of like filtering in there. But in terms of like other fantasy things, like I love magical stories. I like used to read Harry Potter, Percy Jackson, all those sort of things. And like I think it's nice to see like the different aspects coming together in a game. Also Pokemon, I think Pokemon has been a big inspiration. Sure. And you can probably see that in the game as well, with the top-down nature of it, and the way you can interact with things and have little story moments pop up.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that the inclusion of Htay, the character with the witch, here she is, it's the depiction of a good witch versus some of the sort of more, more classic depictions of witches in literary terms, where they're some evil and green and that kind of thing. What was that conscious decision to make a positive story about a witch, to frame women who create things in this way in an interesting and good light, I suppose?
Yeah, I think the witchy nature of the game is just taken from, I guess, inspired from my own journey with art and creating something, and that feeling quite magical, like you're bringing something into the world. And I think I wanted to, promote that vibe, or put that into the game somehow. So creating like this young witch character who's very innocent and young and sort of happy to be doing what she's doing is something that, I felt like it was something I wanted to explore. I was also really inspired by Kiki's delivery service, so much so that the cat in the game, Htay has a cat, and it's called Kiki, as a little nods to
nice
the movie.
Nod.
Yeah, because Kiki is this young witch off on her journey and self-discovery, and that's, kind of what Htay is as well.
Fantastic. And you mentioned a minute ago about that soft storytelling, and it kind of made me think of an example of a game called Unpacking. I don't know if you've ever played that kind of pixel art kind of thing, and in that game there's no direct storytelling, you just unpack boxes from each time someone moves house, and it tells you this kind of indirect story. I just wondered if you'd ever played that, and it had been a...
I haven't, but it's funny. I think someone mentioned that to me like quite recently. Yeah, it sounds like a...
Yeah, I think you'd like it.
Yeah.
And so now you've moved on to working as a technical artist at Rare, who are a very famous UK games company based up in the Midlands. And so what's it like now working on stories that aren't your own?
I think...
And what's the difference?
Yeah. It's been like a wonderful experience going to work for a video game company. It's different. So I'm working on Everwild, which is Rare's new game that's going to be coming out, and it's also a fantasy-inspired game. So a lot of what I enjoy and what I'm passionate about is in Everwild, which is really great for me. And it means that I guess because it's not my vision, there's a lot of communication that has to happen between different disciplines, between everyone on the team to make sure that we're all aligned. And in a sense, like I have, I don't know, it's quite nice that I get to explore this world that we're all sort of creating together in a sense. And I get to push for it in my own certain way, so I can push for the visuals to try help and convey what we want the player experience to be like in a different way than creating a whole game myself. And I think it's quite nice that, you know, other people are telling me how to make the game, but I get to sort of... like I get to express it how I want to and how I feel would be best, and then have people review it and tell me how it's working and stuff, which is nice to also get the feedback and have other people's perspective on things.
Yeah, and you must be familiar with the kind of law books and so forth, the style guides that James was talking about, and how that steers different people within the team, I guess, to what the overall goal is, right?
Yeah, we'll have like different documents for different purposes. For some of our games, if we're kind of creating a game from the ground up, we'll have like a big document full of like thematic pillars, which are kind of like the core statements which every element of the game should be reflecting. So if it's about kind of being alone in the dark, we'll make sure the art direction is always emphasizing loneliness, isolation, darkness, as you might expect. And those documents, that'll be like a big one that shows the whole team, and then, as you say, individual disciplines will have their own set of documents relevant to them. Like we'll have a style guide for the writers, but obviously the coders don't need to know how we're using dashes, unless it breaks the programming.
And so with you now working with that kind of documentation and giving that steer, how's that experience just in terms of steering your craft area of technical art?
Let me think. So, yeah, I think it's nice to have like that drive and that vision, and have other people sort of, give like a hands-on guide. I remember when I first started at the company, I had to sit down with like the producer, and she gave this like, you know, overview about what Everwild is and exactly the sort of like stories that we're trying to bring and stuff. It's helped a lot, I think, like me creatively outside of work as well. Right. Like I'm doing a lot more like art in my own time and illustrations and stuff, which is fun like to explore, and it's nice to see how work has influenced that. Being in a studio of a lot of passionate people who are excited about bringing this world to life has helped driven me to do things in my own time, which has been really good.
Fantastic. So James, I want to come back to talk to you about, firstly, you know, Fallen London, but it's part within today's festival celebrating world building across all of the British Library. It's the exhibitions are still open for today and I think tomorrow. So if you haven't had a chance to check them out, please do so. But let's just take a quick look at Fallen London. Fantastic. So that's Mask of the Rose, one of
Yes.
the latest additions to the Fallen London universe, I think you could say.
Yes.
And so I think what's very clear in that trailer is that there's a familiarness to the world, but it's quite a different way of looking at things. This kind of world slightly out of step with our expectations, sometimes terrifying, sometimes romantic, sometimes both. So what appeals to you about working in that realm and what the realm of fantasy and bringing that kind of the fail better games slant on it all?
Some of it is, obviously we're drawing on real history. And so if you're interested in history, getting to really kind of dig into the minutiae is great fun. But again, it's that kind of conjunction of the fantastical with the real world, and kind of always going for unexpected influences and unexpected elements, and having those crop up and finding ways within our world building to make those weirdnesses make sense. Or if we decide that we're a 19th century game, we'd like to do a riff on Dracula, but then we can't just have vampires because people would wonder why there weren't vampires before. We can't just patch them in. We'll find a reason in our lore where something like a vampire, in this instance is basically a landlord, can appear in Fallen London and not break things or give us angry emails.
I think that's
from
called
players.
satire. Is it? Yeah, I think so, yeah.
It wasn't intended.
So yeah, and then I guess bringing in elements people might not expect. So again, similarly in some of the mechanics that we're talking about here, adding this element of romance to being able to romance some of these interesting characters or explore interactions with them in different ways, I think.
That was the appeal, because we've got 4 games in the setting. One is a browser game that's been running for about a decade, over a decade now, and that has accumulated vast amounts of world building and lore. And then we did 2 roguelikes, which are kind of set in quite perilous spaces, which are all about kind of death and you can die quite easily, etc. Whereas this was the chance to do something more intimate, more familiar, and something that was a lot more accessible. But also we set it in the world just at the point, because the idea is London is stolen by bats in the mid-19th century, and all of our games are set like after people have got time to get used to the idea. Whereas this one we were like, we want to show what that's like from the ground up and let you have those very intimate, kind of more personal connections with other characters, because you're all collectively experiencing the same quite cataclysmic, life-changing events together.
And as a writer then, exploring those interactions and building on these worlds as you iterate from a sort of central pillar, which I guess Fallout London is and was, how it then expands out into these other worlds. As a writer, how do you go about exploring and knowing where to head next within that?
I guess it sounds counterintuitive, but one of the things I think, certainly for writing something in a universe of this size, or even any project really, I think Tolkien mentioned it, having blank spaces on the map, leaving yourself room to not know everything, to not feel a need to know everything, to have what you need to know to understand, what the player needs to know to understand the world, and so you've got enough material to provide coherent storytelling for them. But you also want to give yourself room to maneuver, room where you don't know everything, room where you can say, well, I don't actually know what's over there, or we've said at some point there was this event in the past, but we've not given you anything other than the vaguest details of what that is. We'll go and explore that, and that keeps it kind of creatively fresh, and means that we can kind of decide we're going into space, as we did one game and had room to go into space in the lore.
There's plenty of room up there, I suppose.
There was a lot of room where I think our producer was quite upset at the amount of room.
Yeah, no. So that's Sunless Seas and Sunless Skies.
Sunless Skies, yeah.
Which are the 2 roguelikes you mentioned, both of which are fantastic games. And so, you mentioned this kind of pseudo-historical setting in which the world existed as ours did to a certain point, and then everything changed. And so thinking about the research work and to make that authentic, to make it feel like that is the case, what kind of research and craft do you put into that to give it that?
We, obviously, for any kind of new topic, we kind of will go away and we have like dedicated research time. Occasionally we bring in consultations from outside. When we did Mask of the Rose, we knew we were including significant kind of Jewish characters and a Sikh character, so we brought in kind of experts, academic experts, to discuss what it would have been like for those communities in the period, to kind of just bring that verisimilitude into the kind of storytelling that we were doing. Otherwise, it's a case of going very specific topic by topic. We introduced and then removed elections from Fallen London, as they got a little bit contentious. But we did some great fun kind of finding kind of reference books, finding stuff online as much as possible, but we try and cite properly and find not just Wikipedia. And the kind of stuff people got up to in the elections, people would just kind of be taken to the local pub and given ample booze and then taken to vote by the candidates, which certainly livened it up. And that kind of provides things we wouldn't do exactly like that, but you can think, well, what was cheating like? Yeah. Given the fantastical elements we've introduced, what possibilities for fiddling an election are there, given that there are kind of octopus people?
6 more? I don't know. So, again, and like thinking about those influences as well, what kind of literary influences are we talking about? What are the sort of nearest sort of contemporary things or other literary works you're thinking about when you're writing for this, in the literal written text sense?
We're kind of obviously drawing on a lot of Victorian fantastical fiction, Dracula, Frankenstein. We read some really terrible social romances of the period when we were doing Masque of the Rose. There was a lot of really, really poor quality Victorian literature out there. I have now read quite a lot of it.
You can still get that in airports, I think. Still out there.
The thing is, we're a pastiche. We don't want to kind of actually replicate Victorian social mores or prose because people would not largely enjoy that. So we are trying to write in a way that is accessible. Lush, but accessible, hopefully. So we kind of draw on contemporary fantasy, things like Jeff Vandermeer, China Miéville, The Weird, Ursula K. Le Guin. I'm a big fan of Tanith Lee. So kind of more decadent, more fantastical fiction that's more contemporary to kind of hone the voice and the atmosphere. Yeah,
so to bring the vibe, the Sherlock Holmes, the Dracula, all of that kind of thing, but express it in a way that makes sense to modern audiences, but also isn't, like you say, trying to translate their world and keep it that way, but add the player's experience into that as well, and
exactly.
Let them explore it as they wish.
Exactly. We want people to kind of find it's fairly, the world's quite dark, but a safe space as much as possible. We want people to feel included and that there is exploration for kind of various identities possible. And kind of because obviously history is full of, when you kind of dig into it, you find all kinds of, it's never as simple as you imagine. So there's all room for all kinds of complexities that we like to make sure is given presence and space.
Yeah, great. And thinking about then recrafting that world, as you've done several times, the game that you have on exhibition here is a very condensed version of Fallen London. So you've made a game specially for this exhibition.
For this exhibition, it's got a couple of characters from Masque of the Rose, and it's just a very brief exploration of the world just after the fall. Takes maybe about 2 minutes to play. And yeah, it was just kind of a chance to kind of... Masque of the Rose was already intended to be a kind of more accessible starting point, whereas this was supposed to be even more accessible because we assume people will be walking past, only got a few minutes to engage with it. So it's as atmospheric, hopefully, and direct an exploration of the setting as possible.
Fantastic. So, Bridie, as a producer, you must be quite familiar with the world of recrafting games down into different kinds of content, and that must be quite a familiar...
Yeah, it's hard sometimes as the producer to see someone's vision, but be able to take the long view and say, I know it's going to take too long to make that. So how do we get that vision across in a way that you can still have what you want, but it's cheaper and you're not going to crunch?
So I just want to show off one of the games you've been working on, which is the wonderfully titled Wizard with a Gun. Fantastic. That is, again, a gorgeous-looking game, and as you can see, quite action-driven. I guess my first and most obvious question is, why does a wizard need a gun?
Well, because it's cool, first of all. Galvanic, so Wizard with a Gun is from a team in Seattle called Galvanic, Devolver Publish. And Patrick, the leader of the team there, thought, yeah, Wizard with a gun, that's a cool concept. And then the lore around it now supports that concept. The gun is a focus for your magic. You craft specific bullets with spells that have gone into it to make an ice bullet that also boomerangs back towards you or creates a wall in front of you. So it's, you know, the name is now justified by the lore rather than the lore and the world building coming first.
That's an interesting way about it, isn't it? So in games, you can kind of come at things from either direction. You can either have a literary world that you want to create and put something out there, and try and tell a story within it, or you can go, I've made this cool thing, and you know, I've started with Egglian, you know, and I've created this cool egg that jumps around, and now it's starting to inspire those greater ideas. And so it's about balancing that approach in different ways.
Yeah. And so the world of Wizard with a Gun has this really rich lore. Because Patrick is a huge world-building fan. And you can find little bits and pieces throughout the world, like I said, you know, environmental storytelling. And the biggest advice that we talked about this week, actually, is his advice to young game designers is to think about the smaller details. You know, how do people eat in this world? What are the little things to think about when you're shaping it? And how can you bring that into the game without, you know, having to go into pages and pages of details on how there's an economy and farming and all of this stuff. But you know that people do, you know, live there, and it feels like something that people live in.
So you have enough information for the player to tell them about that without having to, just go overboard with it, really. And so that was, as a producer, your role is all about helping the game get delivered on time, to budget, and all of those kinds of things. And there's a scope question within that as well.
Yes.
So keeping things within a manageable amount. And so you must have had experience where, you know, you've seen games that you've gone, maybe there needs a bit more storytelling in this game to get the point across, or perhaps sometimes you've gone, there's quite a lot of storytelling here, and, you know, maybe going to be able to achieve all of that.
Almost always the second way. There's too much here and we need to scope down. So this other screenshot here is from the Talos Principle 2, which came out last year, and I worked with that team. All of the puzzles for that, it's a puzzle game, exist in quite big open world maps, which made sense for the story. We're trying to create a believable world, and if it's on an island, well, an island would probably be about this big. But if there's not enough gameplay to support a space that's really big, then you end up with a player walking through it and feeling quite lost and maybe bored, which you don't want. So, you know, one of the ways I helped or hindered the team, depending on who you are, was to say, like, let's just reduce the size of that space down. Let's, you know, look at the map and see where we can move things so there's just a better flow between the puzzles. You can still have the quiet introspection of exploring a beautiful open world space without spending a long time without gameplay.
Yeah, I think that's the important point about creating games, isn't it? It's like, this has to be fun.
Yeah.
You have to deliver fun, otherwise you're making another bit of software, right? You know, it's like that point that the player has to have something they're doing, they know where they're going.
It's the question that should be behind any decision, in my opinion, is, does this make it more fun? Same with the world building. It's like, it might make it more interesting or deeper or fulfill your narrative vision, but is it fun to experience that as a player? Yeah,
and I think you mentioned a little bit earlier about some advice for young people, and I think part of the advice kind of be asked is how do people get into games? And the love of the fantasy genre has really helped you. It's been part of your career, and you've worked in sort of different areas that have taken you on this journey to games. You maybe want to tell us a little bit about that.
I grew up just as the Lord of the Rings films came out, and I was instantly a huge nerd for Lord of the Rings, and decided that I would work in fantasy publishing. That didn't quite work out, but I made non-fiction books instead for film, TV, and video games. And I started making lore books with Rare, actually. I made Tales from the Sea of Thieves, where we kind of helped Rare shape their lore as something that people who liked Sea of Thieves could go and experience in a new format. And I was like, oh, these video game people are cool. I think I'll go do that.
And then that led you on a journey through to doing what you're doing. It's
Yeah,
quite, I guess, quite a different area, production. So it's almost like there's not kind of a direct route to a production role. You can kind of come into things.
Yeah,
from angles.
you can come at production as long as you like spreadsheets. I think you can come at production from any background. It's about being able to support people's vision. So when I was making lore books, I was still supporting creative people to do the thing that they wanted to do, and help give them the structure and the to-do lists and the spreadsheets that brings that vision to life. And it's the same in game production.
Mm. And I think true of the world of work everywhere, there's always spreadsheets involved somewhere.
Yeah.
So just before we come to the Q&A, I want to ask Alfie and Sophia about some of the films and books and maybe games that have inspired you along your journey. You've mentioned a couple of it already. You mentioned Kiki's delivery service, Sophia. So what else has inspired you in a literary sense or in film or games? What?
I mean, I think one I really, really enjoy is like The Legend of Zelda, Breath of the Wild, Tears of the Kingdom. They're both wonderfully crafted worlds and have really nice gameplay as well inside them. And it's also, yeah, like world building told in the environment, in little things you find, in the way a village is, that I really enjoy about those worlds. Yeah, I mentioned like Pokemon already. I think Pokemon does a really good job as well with this like soft storytelling. I'm a big fan of this soft like storytelling, where yeah, like you're visiting towns and cities and you see how people interact with Pokemon and how trainers, gym leaders of different towns sort of lead their lives and how there's this relationship between different people and Pokemon. That I think
fantastic.
Is really
Alfie?
I think, I mean, I first played Hollow Knight when it came out, and I think with that game, there's so many like little details and kind of like, I mean, the world building in general, because I mean, if you look at Hollow Knight, it's so well decorated, and obviously the art's amazing, but I think it's the attention to detail in that art that really helps make the world building and makes the characters that surround that world. Mm-hmm. And the writing's great because I feel like Hollow Knight is a very kind of like introverted game, not the people that are playing it, but almost like its identity in itself.
Yeah, sure.
Because I mean, like, when a character starts talking, they kind of do like they do like whispers, but they don't really ever talk. And I mean, it's just kind of great because it really helps add to the scenery and that kind of bubble of ideas kind of all attracts to the centre spot of the game's identity, and I feel like that really hit me quite hard.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think for such a fast-paced action game, it has this kind of overall sense of solitude, and you're not quite sure what people think and all this kind of stuff. Or the other characters aren't really people; they're weird insects and stuff. But
and you think those would conflict, but they don't. And they work really well in tandem, and I think that's what makes Hollow Knight so special.
I'd agree with you, fantastic. And so just before we go to Q&A, any other recommendations from your sides about games with wonderful worlds you'd recommend people explore?
A game that kind of meant a lot to me as a teenager was called Longest Journey, which is like a 90s adventure game where the premise is you're playing April Ryan, who's a sort of depressed art student in Los Angeles, which I found really romantic as growing up in kind of Liverpool. But she's kind of like having a tough time about to drop out of college, and she finds this fantasy world that's kind of really bright and vibrant, and she treats it as you would if you stepped into a fantasy world. It's kind of just a playground, and then slowly kind of she goes back and realizes she has to find a way back to the fantasy world, but it's changed. And I guess that deepening and that contrast and the need to have both elements working together really meant something.
Fantastic.
I'm a really big fan of the post-apocalyptic Earth in the Horizon Zero Dawn games.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I think they've done a wonderful job of imagining what societies would come out of that kind of cataclysm and grounding it in a very kind of interesting view of communities and cultures who are just trying to survive together.
Yeah. And it's so vibrant and colourful as well. So post-apocalyptic, not being all grey and brown and miserable.
It's
kind
not
of
the
something
Fallout
new and fresh
version.
has come out.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's a wonderful game. The art style is superb.
Yeah, and it's quite optimistic as well, which is nice.
Yeah, exactly. So, well, I'm going to open it up to questions from the audience. We have some online, so if you've been online watching this, please feed them through. Yeah, so I think there's someone with a microphone in the centre. So, yeah, hands up if you have a question, please. We have a gentleman down here in the front row.
When you're taking into consideration like world design throughout the process of making a game, how much does the mechanics of the game kind of feed back and influence the world design, kind of back and forth throughout the process of making the game?
Do you want to take this one?
I mean, the simple answer is a great deal. When we were making kind of Sun the Skies, which was a roguelike, we knew kind of a lot of the gameplay was going to be moving between places because all the gameplay happens when you're in danger. If you just import, you're safe. But we wanted to motivate players, obviously, to move around the world. And we kind of kept redesigning the spaces because we had like very kind of highfalutin narrative reasons for each one being very distinct. And they looked gorgeous, but there was too much emptiness in space for the player to interact with. And so we kind of went and had to redesign them until they were basically handcrafted narratives in each individual section around each port to make the player's journey both reflect the narrative themes we wanted each segment to get across, but also to make it actually, as you say, fun for the player to engage with.
It's like a trying to balance a scale of like the gameplay is fun and it makes sense, but we're achieving the narrative goals and the world building that we want to do.
Yeah, the narrative gives you a reason to do the game.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Next question. Another one down the front here in the middle.
Hi. How important is the rules of engagement in a game? So, like the kind of I suppose game engine. If you take the difference between, let's say, Wolfenstein, when that first came out, it was very basic first-person shoot 'em up, through to Return to Castle Wolfenstein, when it became a lot more sophisticated with gravity and that sort of thing involved. Two questions. Question one is how important is defining the rules of the world that you're creating when you're creating a world? And the second part of that question is what's the impact been of game engines like Unreal?
The impact of game engines like Unreal is that games are getting more expensive and bigger to make, and you can do more, which is great. But you can tell a story economically through pixel art. There's some brilliant, very minimalist games that are really fun to play and have like a world that you can experience without needing photorealism. And yeah, I think it's important to have an idea of where you want to go with the story and an internal logic behind the things that are happening in a game. But also you can just do something because it's fun and kind of gamify it a bit and just find a way to justify it afterwards.
I think as defining the player role is sort of, once you know what the player is, what the verb is, what they're doing, that kind of tells you exactly what the rest of the game will be. I think as Alfie said earlier, you don't want storytelling from a writing point of view to be kind of just happening over there, just something you can kind of go and read about in a book. You want it as much as possible to be something that the player is engaging with and through playing, and so you kind of have to craft the narrative in a way that follows the kind of verbs that the player is using. If it's walking, what are they looking at, what's around them? If it's fighting, it's about what we're saying about the design of the enemies. What stories are we telling about kind of their armour, their weapons, their appearance, etc. That kind of soft storytelling approach.
And that storytelling kind of as the reward for some of the actions you've been completing, I suppose.
Yeah, for sure.
Next question, we have one up at the back in the middle. Do you want to just wait for the microphone? Thank you.
How do you view continuity in terms of the player being introduced to it to ensure that their immersion doesn't get ruined as you introduce elements to sort of maintain it?
Good question, apparently.
Good question.
Yeah.
It depends on the game. I think our trickiest one is because we have a long-running browser game that is continuously updated, and we're very fortunate, sometimes too fortunate, to have very kind of attentive players who will notice when there are slip-ups in the continuity. But it's an ever-evolving world, so we need to introduce new elements to keep it fresh, both for ourselves creatively, but also so the players aren't bored because they've seen a tentacled man 1,000 times at this point and it's no longer interesting for them. So, as I said earlier, I think leaving space for you to kind of introduce new elements, saying, well, we've not defined, or I guess in the same way that you would for creating an expansion or patching in new content for a more conventional game, leaving room to be kind of, well, we've defined that there is something over here, but we've not really clarified what that is, or we've left it as a mystery, a treat for us to explore later, I think is vital, so you're not penning yourself in too much.
Okay, fantastic. Next question. I've got a lady here in the middle. And then the next question would be great if there was a younger person in the audience who wanted to ask something, especially to our YGD winners. But yeah.
Hi, thank you. I just wanted to ask what the main difference is in the process of creating a game when the original idea comes either from the world itself or maybe the main character that you want to push forward in an environment, or maybe the overall story, the allegory that you want to use and transmit to the public when you're building the game.
Ooh, another really good question. I think if you have an allegory or a character that you really want to put into a game, then you have to make sure that the gameplay that is fun works for that character and that vision. So if you want to tell a story that has a specific message, how does the gameplay support that message? If you have them be separate, it will feel slightly disjointed. But if there's a gameplay reason for that message, or you can lead players towards it through the actions that they're doing.
I think it's magic when that happens, when you have like storytelling that works so well with how a game mechanic is. Like I'm thinking of like Celeste. So in Celeste, it's a story about like a young girl basically sort of fighting with her mental health and trying to get through life, and she's climbing a mountain. That's what the gameplay is. And the game loop is very, very quick. It's like you try something, you fail, you restart. It's all about sort of pushing through and like persevering through struggle. And yeah, it's really nice how the story of Celeste reflects that, and the gameplay supports it as well. I think it's such a great experience when you can get that down. So yeah, thinking about what story you want for your character and trying to marry it with gameplay, I think creates really beautiful, beautiful games.
Making sure that the format, the genre, is kind of supporting the message you want to say. Certainly as a writer, it's very tempting to kind of do storytelling by fixing it with just more and more text, just cram more text in to kind of get your point across. But we found in our roguelike game, certainly because the point of roguelike and the theme of the game was about death and loneliness. And we found we kept interrupting the player with kind of screens would pop up with more and more kind of text, conversations, events happening. There's always something going on your ship somewhere, someone's always having a problem. And it just became a point where it's sort of, well, the player's time is being distracted constantly. And also the world now feels very alive. And that feels completely counterintuitive to what we're trying to say.
I think, as I was saying with Hollow Knight, sometimes opposites can attract, and sometimes I feel like the gameplay and kind of the theme doesn't have to match. You have to be very careful with that, of course, because I've seen cases where that has failed. But I feel like it's really interesting when a designer tries to do that and pulls it off, because you then kind of have like a bit of a weirder game, and I feel like it's very interesting for players as well, because maybe it's not as much as what they were expecting at first. Yeah.
And which I guess Celeste is another good example of that, being such a technical and quite a difficult action platformer that is also a story about mental health. You kind of wouldn't normally you'd expect a kind of slower paced game that doesn't try and do that. But yeah, it's a really interesting, the kind of, I guess the objectives of what you want to do versus marrying that to the mechanics, and it's about the creative approach you have to put whatever those elements together.
Yeah.
Everyone loves a remix, Next question. Do we have any younger people? If not, I'll go.
I've got a question online, if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, sure.
Brilliant. I've got one from Gordon. How much does player feedback, suggestions, complaints, etc., influence world building in games?
Oh, that's a difficult one. So before release, if you're lucky and you have the budget for it, you might get to do some rounds of playtesting with new people who've never seen the game, and then they give feedback, and that's really helpful. After release, you would know better.
You kind of develop a filter for kind of useful feedback versus someone's just upset because it's, especially in a historical game, it's not marrying what they want out of, or their particular impression of what the past was like. And you learn to filter those out because you're just kind of never going to please that kind of person. It depends on, again, on the type of feedback. Obviously, as I was saying, we have like very dedicated wiki writers who keep us honest. And often you'll kind of see feedback come in, and it'll be either, sometimes it'll be, you've got a point, but we need to move forward. Like, there is just not time in the schedule to go and address this, the very boring answer. Or sometimes it's like, well, no, we don't actually agree with the approach we took 10 years ago, and we would rather evolve it, and we can't do that all at once. But this is where we're starting. We're putting a line in the sand on this new story that shows this setting element in a new light, and that's the approach taken forward, and we'll gradually backdate it. So I guess it kind of depends on the type of feedback, how polite it's expressed.
Yeah, that's something to remind people, is that we're just people. We're just normal people making video games for fun. Please be kind.
I think one great way to gain feedback as well is to take your game to events, and I know Devolver is quite prominent at events, and I feel like that's very kind of direct, because you then get to kind of kindle a relationship with the gamers, and you get to see what they think, and then obviously you can take that back to the developers and then say, this is what they thought, this is what we could do to maybe improve these things. And I feel like being able to kind of have that direct reach to the people you're trying to sell this thing to is really important, and I feel like it's a great way for developers to get proper feedback.
Yeah. And how was that for you the first time you saw someone else playing Eglion that you didn't know already, so a new person playing?
A new person. I didn't feel scared, because I feel like I'm very kind of like open to feedback. I know some people aren't as much, and some people kind of like question what people think, but I'm very much the kind of person that just kind of like, wow, thank you so much for saying this, because this really helps me out. And I felt like, I mean, everyone's kind of a little bit nervous at first to see what people think, but I felt like once I'd kind of received the bits, it was like, I'm so driven now. I can go back and I can go fix this. It's more stuff for me to do, you know.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, it sounds like you've got quite a lot on your plate, so try not to keep doing too much. And do go to school, those kinds of things, still quite important. Much as we love do education also important. Any other questions in the room? We have a gentleman over there on the right-hand side.
For the young person's question, so, I mean, what tips would you give to a young person just starting out and thinking about getting into creating worlds and creating games?
Yeah, was that tips? Tips, yeah. I'd say just start doing it, really, is the main thing. Yeah, I guess you can, look at inspiration and take things, but you learn by doing, I guess, in a sense. So, like, I mean, do you wanna go off that?
I'm not sure.
It can be very daunting, I think, like the games industry. There's so many different paths to get to being in the games industry. So I think the best thing you can do when you're young is just explore what you like doing, create things, and, you know, talk to other people about it if you can. The internet is a great and wonderful place for that. Trying to, connect to people and see what other people are doing as well can inspire your own journey and what you want to do. If you want to and you're very passionate about it, you can download a game engine and start trying to play around with games. There's Unity, there's Unreal. If you're younger, maybe there's Scratch as well. That's one I used to do a bit of. So yeah, just there's lots of sources online, like YouTube tutorials and everything. I've learned so much. My game was basically just made from YouTube tutorials.
That's how all games are made.
Yeah. I still do that. My job is just looking and Googling
Even after
stuff.
many years of
Yeah.
I think the main thing I would say is have fun doing it. Like whatever it is you want to do it for yourself. Like any art, whether you're learning to play an instrument, whether you're learning to paint, whether you're learning to make games, enjoy it, have a good time. There's no pressure, there's no timeline you have to have it done by. Just start doing it, see what you like, think I want to make it like this, maybe meet some people who are also interested in that, share it with your friends, and just, there's no rush, but work forward on it and have fun.
Yeah.
That's the main thing.
I have a good thing to add. Accept that the first things that you make might not be perfect or good, and that's okay. Because you're learning, and you're learning what you like to make and how you like to make it.
And I think if you're having fun as well,
Yeah.
you'll meet the people that are having fun also, and then you can kind of, maybe collaborate or maybe, talk about what you find interesting in what you're making. And I feel like having that community, I'm in a lot of great communities on Discord and other places, and that's kind of how I made my start, kind of finding people that were also starting out and just really relating to them.
Yeah, great. Well, that unfortunately brings us to the end of our time. So I hope you've had a wonderful conversation. I heard a wonderful conversation about this. I'd like to thank our panellists first and foremost. Please put your hands together for them. And I'd like to thank you for being a wonderful audience, and to our guests online. And just to say that we'll be hosting those young game designer workshops over in the main building from 1 o'clock. So please do head over there to learn a bit more about how games get made and maybe try your hand at making one. So hopefully we'll see you there shortly. Thank you.